You can, right here. Whoa. You have a choice of 2 microphones, or both.
This is it, right?
Okay.
We're ready to roll.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. We come here this afternoon with a little bit of sadness and also a little bit of joy to pay our last respects to Ruth Oppenheimer, who is just a delightful, bouncy, excited, vivacious woman who passed away at age 96, is that correct? And her 3 sons are here, and the daughter-in-laws and friends and members of our temple to pay our last respects. So it's, as we were talking about before, it's a little bit of a memorial service, and it's a little bit of a celebration of a long and fruitful life that she devoted to family and to service and to the Jewish community and to her friends and to many other things that made her a very unique personality. And even in her last months and years that she was in some ways limited, but she always had that big smile, and she was just very, very happy and very embraced life for the fullest. So I'm going to start by reading a few readings, and then we'll have a few people who will speak about Ruth. And then we'll have a memorial prayer and conclude with the mourner's Kaddish. One of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes. And there's a very famous section in there that you may recognize in the Hebrew, but you will certainly recognize in the English. It was also made into a hit song in the 1960s that nobody under 50 years old probably remembers. L'chol zman ve'et, l'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim. Et loledet ve'et lamut, et lotat ve'et la'akor natua, et laharog ve'et lerpo, et lifrotz ve'et libnot. There is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for destroying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for refraining from embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for tearing and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. The next reading is from the 15th Psalm. It's an excerpt from the 15th Psalm, which is traditionally read at memorial services. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai mi yogur bo'alecha, mi yishkon bahar kodshecha, halech tamim upoel tzedek, v'dover emet v'lvavo, lo ragal al lishono, lo asa l're'eu ra'ah, v'rchepa lo nasa al krova. Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and, come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. This is from Psalm 23, and is one of the most famous parts of the Bible. I'm using the New Rabbi's Manual, which is gender sensitive, so the traditional English has been banned, so you may have a little trouble with a few of the words. But that's the cost of progress. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, Binat deshe yarbitzeni, al me menuchot yinachaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yanchile b'ma'agale tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umeshantecha hema yinachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged sororai. Deshanta b'shemen roshi, kosi rivaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'beit Adonai le'orech yamim. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. This is from the book of Proverbs, and it talks about a good wife, and unfortunately, I didn't know Alan, Ruth's husband, but I'm sure that he would have felt this way about her. A good wife who can find, her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and nothing shall he lack. She renders him good and not evil all the days of her life. She opens her hand to the needy and extends her hand to the poor. She's robed in strength and dignity and cheerfully faces whatever may come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided by kindness. She tends to the affairs of her household and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children come forth and bless her, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a God-revering woman is much to be praised. Place before her the fruit of her hands. Wherever people gather, her deeds speak her praise. I'm going to say a couple words, and I'm also going to read a short message from Rabbi Alan Alpert of Muskegon, Michigan, who was Ruth and Alan's rabbi for 25 years or more, 26 years? Whatever it was, a long time. And I ran into Rabbi Alpert at the Hartman Institute this summer, and he saw, I guess he saw my badge, Dana Evan Kaplan, Sun City, Arizona, and he comes over to me and he just says two words, Ruth Oppenheimer. And I said, how do you know Ruth? And then he explained who he was, and that Ruth had been one of his most active congregants and one of his most beloved congregants for many, many years. And Rabbi Alpert is still in Muskegon, Michigan. And at the time, I must have said to him something like, you know, you've got pretty bad weather there, ha, 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 not realizing I was returning to 114-degree days. So, but he was very keen to participate in some way in this celebration of life because of his sense that Ruth is somebody who really whose passing really needs to be marked because of her devotion and her just tremendous energy, which she tried and successfully to devote to good in the community. So let me start with what he has written. This is from Rabbi Alan Alpert of Muskegon, Michigan. The temple's name is? Okay. Ruth has been a major figure in our Jewish heritage. Her loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi, her compassion and her persistence has inspired generations of Jews to name their daughters after her. Ruth Oppenheimer's parents named her with the name that would crown her life. Ruth and her late husband Alan were pillars of our community before he came to Muskegon and for over 20 years afterwards. Ruth was vibrant and loving and with a warm smile on her face. She was principal of our religious school for years as well as president of Sisterhood. When I came to Muskegon, Ruth and other ladies ran the kitchen with efficiency, harmony, and delicious food. She was in the choir for years and was ubiquitous. When we celebrated our centennial in 1988-89, who were our leaders? Ruth and Alan. The obituary left out one detail. She was part of the Simcha dancers that danced for the Jewish community and beyond. By the way, they called themselves the Kletzets. Even after they moved to Arizona, Ruth and Alan kept in touch with us. When Ruth and Alan moved, we noticed their absence. Our friendship meant a great deal to them and to us. Now, with her passing, an era has ended. Words alone cannot describe Ruth. You needed to be in her presence. Her death leaves sweet memories all over Muskegon. She will be remembered. May her memory continue to serve as a loving benediction and inspiration. And so, I mean, that in three short paragraphs sums up just her impact. Talking to Yolanda and Sherry, I gathered that at least in the early years here, she just took over right away, and she was in the kitchen and working with the sisterhood and mentoring the younger generation who are still here, even though they aren't quite as young as they used to be. And she did it with a certain, a huge smile on her face, and a sense that it's not so hard, we can do it, despite the fact that maybe it was so hard. Ruth and Alan were married for 68 years until Alan passed away in 2016. And so now she was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and then they moved to Muskegon, where they lived most of their adult lives, and then came here to retire. And as you heard from Rabbi Alpert, she was involved in Muskegon and the temple and elsewhere in pretty much everything she could do. So I'd like to ask the brothers to come forward and to talk about their mother. I think the order would be Lee, Neil, and Howard. And then, but if you want to change the order, just elbow each other out. And then after that, if anyone else would like to say, you don't have to do a whole eulogy, but if you have a story or some vignette about Ruth that you think would be relevant, and if you're willing to do it, then just please come on up right after Howard, and say whatever you'd like. Okay. We'll start now with Lee.
Thank you, Rabbi Kaplan and Rabbi Alpert as well for stealing my thunder, but that's okay. Thanks to all of you at Temple Beth Shalom.
Hold on, I don't think we can hear you.
That better? Yes? No?
I think maybe use that mic.
Okay. All right. Here we go. So thanks to all of you at Temple Beth Shalom, as well as those who are watching the service on the live stream today for being here to honor our mom, Ruth. My name is Lee, and I'm Ruth's first son, and I get my young-looking genes from Mom. Before I get started, I'm sure you've all known someone who, as kids, has said that their mom liked them best. I must issue a warning at this time that at some point today you may hear from one or both of my brothers, who I do love and cherish, that Mom liked them best. But it was proof that it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So I'm here today to prove that Mom liked me best, at least for the first 4 years until Neil was born. Who got Mom's beautiful dark complexion and love for laying in the sun? Moi. Who got Mom's beautiful white hair in their beard? Moi. And who got Mom's fanaticism for sports, specifically Baltimore Oriole baseball team and Baltimore Colt football team? Mom was a football fan before women really got into football. Give yourselves a pat on the back if you answered all 3 questions correctly. Enough about me, though. Let's talk about Mom. Not many people are blessed to have had 3 first names during their life. For most of her life, she was Ruth. In her later years, and certainly the last 2.5 years she spent living at Rock Creek, she was Ruthie to her tremendous caregivers and the Rock Creek staff. But for 71.5 of her 96 years, 5 months, and 28 days, she was Mom. And during that time, she had many other careers as well. She was a devoted wife to our dad, Alan. She served as Sunday school principal at Temple B'nai Israel. She was a cook, though cook isn't in any way a fair description of the many scrumptious meals that Mom created. She was a baker, renowned for her mundel bread and challah. Mom was a singer in the Temple B'nai Israel choir, dedicating many hours of practice to make our services so much more enjoyable. She was the co-pilot for Dad on all of our summer road trips back to Baltimore to see parents and grandparents, or to Florida, or getting around New York City. She loved to plan the trips with Dad they took around the country and around the world, and across the Western Hemisphere as well. Mom was also a successful salesperson working for J.C. Penney's and a local retailer called Tots and Teens. Though she wasn't the Beatles or Streisand or Garland, she was and will forever be our rock star. Her ability to impact people knew no bounds. Her Jewish faith played a huge role in her life. Mom was a pillar in both of the Jewish communities that she lived. And just because she retired from her job when she and Dad moved to Arizona 32 years ago didn't mean she stopped working, not by a long shot. She dove in head first here at Temple Beth Shalom. She joined Sisterhood, and with her new friend Yolanda, became the go-to team for anything related to food. I was told there was a movement here at the Temple to create a toll-free telephone number for Mom called 1-800-RUTH Cooks. Now, I'm just kidding about the phone number, but that's the kind of impact that she had on people. It was always, what can I do to help? From brisket to chopped liver, from challah to matzo ball soup, the smells coming from the kitchen were always intoxicating. If you didn't feel like eating before you walked into an event at Temple, your stomach certainly started to growl after you walked in, as mine is now. If you're familiar with Chompies here in Peoria, Mom was Chompies before Chompies back home. We will miss her smile, her great sense of humor, and all the times we spent together. Thanks, Mom, for all that you gave to us.
Good afternoon. I'm Ruth's middle son, Neil. Thank you for coming today to celebrate Ruth's life. If they did a TV show about Mom, it would have to be titled, Everybody Loves Ruth. Mom was one of those people who others always enjoyed being with. She had a natural ability to make people comfortable through her conversation and humor. Two things stood out when someone met Mom for the first time: her smile and her hair. Mom enjoyed getting her hair done every week. When I was very young, I remember answering the phone one Friday morning. It was a friend of Mom's calling. I told her Mom was at the beauty salon. Oops, an extra O. My brothers and I learned at an early age, don't touch the hair. You can't talk about Mom without mentioning her cooking and baking. Mom was a wonderful cook and baker who enjoyed being in the kitchen. Our family, friends, and the local Jewish communities were the beneficiaries of Mom's talent. Mom's meals led to my lifelong enjoyment of eating leftovers. Mom had a real sweet tooth, which was particularly interesting given both her father and brother were dentists. When we had Mom over for dinner, we usually offered her a variety of desserts, such as cookies, cake, or ice cream. When we asked which she would like, she often replied, "Give me a little bit of each, please." And she would proceed to finish all of the desserts that we put in front of her. In the last several years, Mom broadened her sweet toothiness by developing a liking for McDonald's chocolate milkshakes. Her ability to drink an entire shake became a constant source of humor for my brothers and me. Family, faith, and friends were all very important to Mom. She cherished her friendships, many of which she developed through her involvement with Temple B'nai Israel in Muskegon, Michigan, and here at Temple Beth Shalom. Mom was very giving and unselfish. If someone needed her, Mom was there. As Dad developed vision problems in his later years, Mom took over all of the driving and would sit and help Dad during his shift as a volunteer dispatcher with the Sun City Posse. Mom had many interests, including being with friends, traveling, cooking, drinking coffee, reading, laying in the sun, playing bridge, drinking coffee, watching baseball, playing bingo, and drinking coffee. She also enjoyed listening to big band and Broadway music and going to concerts. At concerts, Mom would often sing along while clapping her hands and tapping her foot to the music. I really appreciated Mom's wit and sense of humor. Several years ago, I asked if she was glad that she had moved from Michigan to Arizona, and she responded, "Well, let's just say I'm not shoveling snow anymore." She liked being picked on, but could also dish it out. In her later years, I would comment that I was jealous because she had more hair than me. She would reply with something like, "Well, yours is on your face, although it's mostly gray." I will really miss Mom, but take comfort in the following lyrics from Irving Berlin. The song is ended, but the melody lingers on.
Good afternoon. I'm Howard. I'm the baby of the family. I think once a baby, always the baby. And I second Lee and Neil in thanking you for joining us both in person as well as those that are joining us virtually to celebrate Mom's life. One of the challenges of going last in a series of tributes to a special person is that it's usually more difficult to have additional unique perspectives. However, in the case of Mom, there are so many wonderful things to talk about. I didn't have that issue, although Rabbi Alpert did steal some of the thunder. But all for good. Mom was the pillar of every Jewish community she was involved in. I knew this firsthand growing up in Muskegon, as she seemingly was everywhere. The choir, the religious school, the sisterhood. She was one of those folks that if something needed to be done at the temple, she volunteered and got it done. I'm also familiar with Mom's involvement here at Temple Beth Shalom with the sisterhood and helping prepare food for events. And I'm 100% confident if Mom was still around, she would be in the kitchen helping out, making the food for an event today. I also learned that Mom was one of the B'nai B'rith women's group officers in Bradford, Pennsylvania, where Mom and Dad lived for a period way back in the 1950s. So she was truly involved with the Jewish community her entire adult life. As we all know by now, Mom was a phenomenal cook and baker, and I have two distinct memories on the food front. First, growing up in Muskegon, Mom, along with a temple friend, were the folks who catered all of the big temple events, whether it be a holiday meal or a bar or a bat mitzvah. When there was a bar or bat mitzvah celebration on Saturday morning, Mom would be at home on Friday baking several large challahs and then 4 to 5 dozen mini challahs for the event throughout the day. So when I came home from school, the entire house smelled absolutely divine. Knowing that I'd want to eat some of the fresh baked challahs, Mom would always set aside some seconds for me she saved the best for the company, right? Needless to say, I always look forward to the bar and bat mitzvahs coming up in Muskegon because I knew there was going to be a ton of challah. The second cooking story relates to a lovely altruistic act my mom and dad did to help make the lives of police officers working on Christmas Eve a little bit better. In Muskegon in the late 70s, there was literally no 24-hour restaurant. They didn't exist at that time. So my parents decided to open up their house on Christmas Eve so the police officers had a warm place to take their breaks, enjoy delicious hot home cooking, and have friendly conversation with my parents. Mom made all of her specialties: mundo bread, meatballs, casseroles, Texas sheet cake, and of course the always percolating pot of high-octane Maxwell House coffee. It was a special treat for me as I got to stay up really late that night and meet the officers. It was a tremendous hit for 14 years until Mom and Dad retired to Sun City, excuse me, with the 3 local police departments, so much so that even when Denny's restaurant came, and they were open 24 hours a day, all of the officers still came to Mom and Dad's on Christmas Eve, not only for the food, but truly to experience the warmth and friendliness that my mom and dad provided. To use a momism, not to change the subject, and then she would completely change the subject, but Mom had an incredible ability to easily make friends as well as strike up conversations with anybody, whether in line at the grocery store, the beauty shop, or just out running errands. I truly believe that her delightful smile and warm demeanor just put people at ease, and they had conversations that one might expect from a 20-year friendship. I honestly believe Mom would make a great bartender. I consider myself fortunate that I inherited some of this gift of friendly conversation. And I always think of Mom when, if I'm having a conversation with a stranger, one of my daughters will say, Dad, do you have conversations with everyone you meet? And that was really what Mom did anytime she met someone. I'd like to close with one of the best things about being the youngest child, and that was after Leah and Neil moved out of the house, I had Mom all to myself. So we got to do things together and just hang out, which was wonderful. I also learned one of the secrets to Mom's having the energy of the ever-ready bunny when she's always running around, and that is, shh. She took an afternoon nap almost every afternoon she could, and that's something I try to emulate on weekends. I'm going to miss Mom, her smile, her laugh, and her being a great listener, but I'll always cherish the great memories. Thank you.
Anyone else like to say anything?
It's a privilege to be here. The ladies I'm with today, we were members of the Oakmont Ladies Exercise Club. And I came here in '94, and I was bored out of my skull. And Ruth and Emma took me under their wing. I was a horrible bridge player, but they didn't care. They took me anyhow. And as you might have figured out, Ruth was a wonderful volunteer. She would come early to our club and be sure the equipment was all set up before we got there. And on Fridays, she had to come after coffee. She came over here to set up trays quite often on Friday. We worried at Christmas time because we always had a Christmas party. And Ruth says, don't worry about it. I've dealt with Christmas all my life. And she came and she had a wonderful time. But the story that I absolutely loved hearing Ruth tell, and I heard her tell it, and by the way, the three of us were also at Alan's memorial service, and Ruth hustled around to be sure we had enough to eat. Didn't she? She spent time hustling around to be sure we had enough. But Ruth would tell the story about when she and Alan, on one of their road trips, drove down here, bought a house, went to the sunshine service and got some furniture, and then worried about how they were going to go back and tell their boys they were moving. I think they had it all worked out before you found out. Kathleen back there had a birthday party for her, 4 or 5 years ago at Woodmark. I picked her up at Amethyst and at Woodmark and took her to some brunches that we had. And she didn't recognize us. But boy, did she have a good time, and she knew us. She knew she should know us, and she did have a good time, and we loved her. Ruth was a dear. She was a dear lady.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let us pause now for a moment of silence to remember all the wonderful things and all the memories we have, happy memories we have of Ruth Oppenheimer. Please rise for the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen B'Ramim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, Im Kedoshim Utorim Kazor Harakim Masirim, Et Nishamata Shel Nisan Bat Shena Rachel, Shalcha La'alama, Ba'al Rachamim, Yastireh B'seter Kanafav Li'alamim, V'tzror B'tzorah Chaim Et Nashmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata, V'tenuach B'Shalom Al Mishkava. And let us say, Amen. May the source of life, the fountain of all being, open our hearts to compassion and our eyes to wisdom, that we might glimpse in perfect peace and sadness the way of all things. May Nisan bat Shena Rachel's memory be for us a blessing, and may we never let the light of her love grow dim in our hearts. May we remember all her worthy and righteous deeds, that Ruth's memory be forever bound up in the bond of life, B'tzror HaChaim. God is our source and our destination, our beginning and our end. May Ruth's death awaken us to this truth, the bond of love we shared and share, not be severed in sorrow, and may she rest in peace. Together we say, Amen. We now conclude with the Mourner's Kaddish, the Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash. If you want to find it, it's in the prayer books that are in front of you. If you're in the front row, you can grab from the row behind you. Page 598. And there's Aramaic, and there's also the transliteration. We join together. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma dibra krute, v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon u'b'yomechon u'b'chaye dukol beit Israel, ba'gala u'b'zman kariv v'yamru. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach li'alam u'lamei almaya, Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpo'ar, v'yitroman, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitalel, v'yitalal, shmei dekudsha, brichu. Leila min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, damiram bi'alma v'yemru. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, and all humanity, to which we say, may Ruth's memory always be for a blessing. And let us say one final time, Amen. Amen. Amen.